Mick Jagger isn't just a rock star, he's a living legend. For over 6 decades, he's commanded stages, captivated audiences, and shaped the very sound of rock and roll. But behind the microphone, the fame, and the glitzy world of the Rolling Stones, there were battles most people never saw. Rivalries, tensions, and creative conflicts defined much of his career. Whether it was clashes with bandmates, competition with fellow rock icons, or the relentless pressure of staying at the top, Mick's journey was never just about music. It was about survival in the most cutthroat era of rock. From Brian Jones's tragic decline to Keith Richards's relentless wild side, from the rise of the Beatles to rivalries with other legendary artists, Mick Jagger faced challenges that tested his genius, his leadership, and even his very friendships. And through it all, he had to remain the unshakable frontman, the face of the band, the eternal star. Some of these tensions became legendary, whispered stories of arguments, fights over creative control, and the constant battle to prove who truly ruled the rock world. While the world celebrated the music, the private struggles behind it shaped not only Mick Jagger but the future of rock itself. This is the story of Mick Jagger like you've never seen him, the conflicts, the rivalries, and the fire that drove him to become one of the most iconic figures in music history. Long before Mick Jagger became a global icon, he was a young boy in Dartford, England, captivated by music, performance, and rebellion. Born on July 26, 1943, Mick's early years were filled with curiosity and restlessness. He wasn't content to follow the rules. He wanted to challenge them, bend them, and ultimately redefine them. Mick's first rivalry wasn't with another artist, it was with the expectations of society. In post-war England, success meant stability, a steady job, a respectable life. But Mick wanted something more. He found it in music, particularly in the rebellious sounds of American blues and early rock and roll. The beats, the rhythms, and the raw emotion spoke to him like nothing else. In 1962, Mick co-founded the Rolling Stones with Keith Richards, Brian Jones, Charlie Watts, and Bill Wyman. From the very beginning, creative tension became part of the band's DNA. Brian Jones, the band's original leader, was both a genius and a tempest, highly talented, but often difficult. Mick and Brian's early collaboration was electric, but as Mick's stage presence grew, so did the friction. While Brian focused on instrumentation and innovation, Mick's charisma and frontman energy began to dominate. There was always a push and pull, Mick later admitted. We fed off each other, but we also clashed constantly. Even outside the band, rivalries shaped Mick's rise. The Beatles were becoming a global phenomenon, and the Rolling Stones were often compared, sometimes unfairly. Fans and critics alike framed their relationship as a battle of Britain's best bands, a competition that fueled both animosity and motivation. Mick thrived on this pressure, using it as fuel to carve out his own identity. But fame brought personal challenges too. Brian Jones' wild lifestyle and eventual estrangement from the band created tension, forcing Mick into a leadership role far earlier than expected. The pressure wasn't just musical, it was survival, reputation, and the future of a band that would soon define a generation. By the mid-1960s, Mick had fully embraced his role as the Rolling Stones frontman. His onstage energy, distinct voice, and rebellious attitude made him a star, but it also attracted critics, competitors, and enemies. While he celebrated his growing influence, Mick knew that maintaining his position meant constant vigilance, not just in music, but in navigating friendships, rivalries, and the cutthroat world of rock and roll. Even in those early years, it was clear that Mick Jagger wasn't just performing for the crowd. He was performing for survival, for dominance, and for the thrill of the rivalry that drove him. That fire would follow him through decades, shaping not only his music, but the very identity of rock music itself. Mick's early rivalries with bandmates, other artists, and the pressures of fame were more than obstacles. They were lessons. And as he would soon discover, the greatest battles weren't always in the charts or the press. They were in the studio, on the stage, and sometimes deep within himself. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Mick Jagger had become more than a rock star. He was a cultural phenomenon. The Rolling Stones were no longer just a band. They were a symbol of rebellion, excess, and the restless energy of youth. Fans adored Mick's magnetic stage presence. Journalists dissected his every move, and critics debated his place in music history. But alongside the glitter and the acclaim came friction. Within the band, with competitors, and even with himself. One of the most well-documented tensions was with Brian Jones. Jones, the original creative spark behind the Rolling Stones, felt increasingly overshadowed by Mick's prominence. While Brian's genius lay in his multi-instrumental talent and experimental approach, Mick's charisma and leadership were undeniable. The relationship, once collaborative, devolved into constant arguments over songwriting, creative direction, and recognition. It was like watching two stars orbit the same sun, a close associate later said. Brilliant, but destined to collide. Beyond internal struggles, Mick faced the ever-present comparison to the Beatles. The media framed it as a rivalry, the clean-cut Beatles versus the wild, unpredictable Stones. Mick leaned into it, intentionally cultivating the bad boy persona, using it as both a shield and a weapon. Rivalry, he realized, wasn't just a threat. It was a tool. It fueled his performances, pushed him to innovate, and kept audiences riveted. But friction wasn't limited to bandmates or industry competition. Fame brought legal battles, public scrutiny, and personal conflicts. Mick's high-profile relationships, flamboyant lifestyle, and run-ins with the law became tabloid fodder, each incident testing his resilience and patience. Every headline was a challenge, he said years later. I had to decide, let it destroy me or use it as motivation. Musically, tensions often boiled over in the studio. Recording sessions with Keith Richards, for example, could turn into marathon battles of willpower and vision. Mick pushed for innovation, chart success, and audience appeal. Keith fought for authenticity and raw sound. While the clashes sometimes sparked arguments, they also produced some of the band's most iconic work. Songs like Gimme Shelter and Sympathy for the Devil are, in part, the product of creative conflict, a testament to how friction can forge brilliance. Even at the height of their success, Mick had to navigate the delicate balance between maintaining control and letting the band breathe. Leadership in a band as volatile as the Rolling Stones required diplomacy, patience, and occasional ruthlessness. Mick learned that being the frontman wasn't just about performing. It was about managing egos, mediating conflicts, and keeping the group's vision alive despite chaos. The 1970 Altamont Free concert exemplified both the pinnacle and peril of fame. A show meant to celebrate music and culture turned tragic, highlighting the dangers of excess, mismanagement, and unanticipated consequences. Mick took the responsibility seriously, understanding that public success could never fully shield him from the weight of accountability. Through it all, Mick's rivalries, with bandmates, with competitors, and even with himself, became the driving force behind his longevity. Each tension, each confrontation, each heated argument honed his instincts, sharpened his performances, and solidified his place as one of rock music's most enduring figures. For Mick Jagger, rivalry was never just conflict, it was a crucible, shaping the man who would eventually become not only the face of the Rolling Stones but a symbol of resilience, creativity, and the uncompromising spirit of rock and roll. As the 1980s arrived, Mick Jagger's life was a complex dance of fame, creativity, and private struggles. The Rolling Stones were no longer just a band. They were a global institution with legions of fans, massive tours, and a legacy that defined rock music itself. But behind the glitz, Mick faced battles that the world never saw, rivalries, personal challenges, and the relentless pressure to stay relevant. Even within the band, tensions simmered. Keith Richards, Mick's lifelong friend and occasional adversary, had grown even more unpredictable. Their creative partnership, while legendary, was also volatile. Disagreements over music, touring, and lifestyle frequently escalated into heated arguments. Keith and I push each other to the edge, Mick once admitted. Sometimes it's friction, sometimes it's fire, but it always sparks something extraordinary. Rivalry wasn't limited to bandmates. As new waves of rock, pop, and alternative music emerged, Mick had to navigate a shifting industry landscape. Bands like U2, Queen, and even the rising hip-hop culture challenged the Rolling Stones' dominance. Mick faced the daunting task of maintaining relevance without compromising the identity that had made him a legend. "I had to evolve," he said. "The world changes, and if you don't, you become history." Personal life added another layer of complexity. Mick's relationships were high-profile and often tumultuous, placing him under relentless media scrutiny. Every romantic entanglement became tabloid fodder, each headline a reminder that fame was both a privilege and a cage. Yet through it all, he remained resilient. People only see the performance, he reflected. They don't see the planning, the struggle, the sacrifices behind it. One of the most significant challenges Mick faced during this period was balancing his artistic integrity with commercial pressure. Record labels, fans, and critics all had opinions about the band's direction. Mick learned to filter the noise, trusting his instincts while negotiating compromises that would preserve both creativity and success. The result was albums like Tattoo You and Steel Wheels, proving that even amidst conflict, greatness could be achieved. Outside the music, Mick also became increasingly aware of his role as a cultural icon. His influence extended far beyond the stage, from fashion and film to activism and philanthropy. Rivalries and conflicts no longer just tested his artistry. They tested his ability to lead, inspire, and remain authentic under unprecedented scrutiny. Despite decades of fame, Mick never lost the hunger that had driven him from Dartford to the global stage. Rivalries fueled him, challenges sharpened him, and mistakes taught him resilience. He understood that being a legend required more than talent. It demanded endurance, adaptability, and the courage to confront not just competitors, but his own limitations. Even now, decades into his career, Mick reflects on this period as formative. The arguments, the rivalries, the near-catastrophic decisions, they were all part of the crucible that forged the Mick Jagger the world knows today. A man who thrived not despite conflict, but because of it. Ultimately, the story of Mick Jagger isn't just about music or fame. It's about navigating life at the highest level, embracing rivalries, overcoming challenges, and emerging stronger, wiser, and more unstoppable than ever. By the 2000s and beyond, Mick Jagger had cemented his place as one of the most enduring icons in music history. But longevity didn't come without its battles. Beyond the bright lights and roaring crowds, Mick faced rivalries, personal struggles, and the ever-present challenge of staying relevant in a changing world. These conflicts, while often private, shaped the man and the legend. One of the most defining rivalries of Mick's later career was not with other bands, but with himself. He constantly questioned whether the Rolling Stones could continue to evolve, whether their music could resonate with a new generation, and whether he could maintain the energy and charisma that had defined him for decades. "I've had to reinvent myself many times," Mick said. "If you don't push yourself, you become predictable, and that's death in this business." Tours in the 2000s, like the A Bigger Bang tour, tested his endurance both physically and mentally. Mick's rigorous performances, often lasting hours night after night, were a testament not just to his talent, but to his relentless work ethic. Critics and fans alike marveled at his stamina, but behind the scenes, it was a constant battle, keeping pace with age, energy, and the expectations of millions. Even with global fame, Mick faced tensions within the band. Keith Richards' health and occasional rebellions created stress, while Ron Wood and Charlie Watts demanded their creative space. Mick's role as frontman and mediator required diplomacy, vision, and patience. He learned that leadership isn't just about talent. It's about balance, empathy, and knowing when to step back and let others shine. Rivalries with other artists persisted as well, though in subtler forms. Competing with emerging bands, negotiating media narratives, and navigating industry politics reminded Mick that music was as much about strategy as artistry. But he embraced this tension, seeing it as fuel to innovate and remain relevant. "Competition keeps you sharp," he said. "It pushes you to be better than yesterday." Beyond music, Mick became increasingly reflective about his influence and legacy. He understood that his public persona was powerful, and he used it responsibly, mentoring young artists, advocating for causes, and setting an example of resilience. While tabloids focused on scandal, Mick quietly demonstrated that longevity comes from discipline, creativity, and the willingness to face challenges head-on. Perhaps the most significant lesson Mick learned over decades of rivalry and conflict is the importance of perspective. Fame, fortune, and rivalry can create pressure, but they also offer opportunities to grow. He came to understand that adversity, tension, and even friction were not obstacles. They were catalysts. Each argument, each competition, each challenge had pushed him to new heights. In his later years, Mick Jagger reflects on a life lived fully, fiercely, and unapologetically. He has embraced the lessons of rivalry, the trials of fame, and the responsibilities of influence. He knows that success is fleeting, but legacy endures, and it is built not just on talent, but on resilience, vision, and the courage to confront challenges both inside and outside oneself. As Mick once said in a rare interview, "The fire that drives you is the same fire that tests you." Embrace both, and you'll understand what it truly means to be alive. Mick Jagger's story is not just the story of a rock star. It's the story of a man who turned conflict into creativity, rivalry into motivation, and a lifetime of challenges into a legend that continues to inspire millions around the world.